Hi, I'm Bryant, and today we will be reading The Adventures of Pinocchio, Chapter 19. Pinocchio is robbed of his gold pieces and, in punishment, is sentenced to 4 months in prison. If the marionette had been told to wait a day instead of 20 minutes, the time could not have seemed longer to him. He walked impatiently to and fro and finally turned his nose toward the field of wonders. And, as he walked with hurried steps, his heart beat with an excited tick-tack, just as if it were a wall clock, and his busy brain kept thinking, "What if, instead of 1,000, I should find 2,000? Or instead of 2,000, I should find 5,000? Or 100,000. I'll build myself a beautiful palace with 1,000 stables filled with 1,000 wooden horses to play with, a cellar overflowing with lemonade and ice cream soda, and a library of candies and fruits, cakes and cookies." Thus, amusing himself with fancies, he came to the field. There he stopped to see if, by any chance, a vine filled with gold coins was in sight. But he saw nothing. He took a few steps forward and he still saw nothing. He stepped into the field. He went up to the place where he had dug a hole and buried the gold pieces. Again, nothing. Pinocchio became very thoughtful and, forgetting his good manners altogether, he pulled a hand out of his pocket and gave his head a thorough scratching. As he did so, he heard a hearty burst of laughter close to his head. He turned sharply, and there, just above him, on the branch of a tree, sat a large parrot, busily preening his feathers. "What are you laughing at?" Pinocchio asked peevishly. "I am laughing. In preening my feathers, I tickled myself under the wings." The marionette did not answer. He walked to the brook, filled his shoe with water, and once more sprinkled the ground which covered the gold pieces. Another burst of laughter, even more impertinent than the first, was heard in the quiet field. "Well," cried the marionette, angrily this time, "may I know, Mr. Parrot, what amuses you so?" "I am laughing at those simpletons who believe everything they hear and allow themselves to be caught so easily in traps set for them." "Do you perhaps mean me?" "I certainly do mean you, poor Pinocchio. You are such a little silly as to believe that gold can be sown in a field and just like beans or squash. I, too, believed that once, and today I am very sorry for it. Today, but not too late. I have reached the conclusion that in order to come by money honestly, one must work and know how to earn it with hand or brain." "I don't know what you're talking about," said the marionette, who was beginning to tremble with fear. "Too bad. I'll explain myself better," said the parrot. "While you were away in the city, the fox and the cat returned here in a great hurry. They took the 4 pieces which you have buried and ran away as fast as the wind. If you can catch them, you're a brave one." Pinocchio's mouth opened wide. He could not believe the parrot's words and began to dig away furiously at the earth. He dug and he dug till the hole was as big as himself. But no money was there. Every penny was gone. In desperation, he ran to the city and went straight to the courthouse to report the robbery to the magistrate. The judge was a monkey, a large gorilla, vulnerable with age. A flowing white beard covered his chest, and he wore gold-rimmed spectacles from which the glasses had dropped out. The reason for wearing these, he said, was that his eyes had been weakened by the work of many years. Pinocchio, standing before him, told his painful tale. Word by word, he gave the names and descriptions of the robbers and begged for justice. The judge listened to him with great patience. A kind look shone in his eyes. He became very interested in the story. He felt moved. He almost wept. When the marionette had no more to say, the judge put his hand and rang a bell. At the sound, two mastiffs appeared, dressed in carabineers' uniforms. Then the magistrate, pointing to Pinocchio, said in a very solemn voice, "This poor simpleton has been robbed of 4 gold pieces. Take him, therefore, and throw him into prison." The marionette, on hearing this sentence passed upon him, was thoroughly stunned. He tried to protest, but the 2 officers clapped their paws on his mouth and hustled him away to jail. There he had remained for 4 long, weary months. And if it had not been for a very lucky chance, he probably would not have had to stay there longer. For, my dear children, you know that it happened just then that a young emperor who ruled over the city of Simple Simons had gained a great victory over his enemies. And in celebration thereof, he had ordered illuminations, fireworks, shows of all kind, and best of all, the opening of all prison doors. "If the others go, I go too," said Pinocchio to the jailer. "Not you," answered the jailer. "You are one of those." "I beg your pardon," interrupted Pinocchio. "I too am a thief." "In that case, you are also free," said the jailer. Taking off his cap, he bowed low and opened the door of the prison, and Pinocchio ran out and away, never a look backward. Chapter 20. Freed from prison, Pinocchio sets out to return to the fairy, but on the way meets a serpent and is later caught in a trap. Fancy the happiness of Pinocchio on finding himself free. Without saying yes or no, he fled to the city and set out on the road that would take him back to the house of the lovely fairy. It had rained for many days, and the road was so muddy at times, Pinocchio sank down almost to his knees. But he kept on bravely. Tormented by the wish to see his father and his fairy sister with azure hair, he raced like a greyhound. As he ran, he was splashed with mud even up to his cap. "How unhappy I have been," he said to himself, "and yet I deserve everything, for I am certainly very stubborn and stupid. I will always have my own way. I won't listen to those who love me and who have more brains than I, but from now on, I'll be different, and I'll try to become the most obedient boy. I have found out, beyond any doubt whatever, that disobedient boys are certainly far from happy, and that, in the long run, they always lose out. I wonder if Father is waiting for me. Will I find him at the fairy's house? If it is so long, poor man, since I haven't seen him, and I do want to see his love and kisses, and will the fairy ever forgive me for all I have done? She who has been so good to me, and to whom I owe my life. Can there be a worse or
more heartless boy than I anywhere."
As he spoke, he stopped suddenly, frozen with terror. "What is the matter?" An immense serpent stretched across the road, a serpent with bright green skin, fiery eyes, which glowed and burned, and a pointed tail that smoked like a chimney. How frightened was poor Pinocchio! He ran back wildly for half a mile, and at last settled himself atop a heap of stones to wait for the serpent to go his way and leave the road clear for him. He waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but the serpent was always there, and even from afar one could see the flash of his red eyes and a column of smoke that rose from his long pointed tail. Pinocchio, trying to feel very brave, walked straight up to him and said in a sweet, soothing voice,
"I beg your pardon, Mr. Serpent. Would you be so kind as to step aside to let me pass?"
He might as well have talked to a wall. The serpent never moved. Once more, in the same sweet voice, he spoke.
"You must know, Mr. Serpent, that I am going home where my father is waiting for me. It is so long since I have seen him. Would you mind very much if I passed?"
He waited for some sign of an answer to his question, but the answer did not come. On the contrary, the green serpent, who had seemed until then wide awake and full of life, suddenly became very quiet and still. His eyes closed and his tail stopped smoking.
"Is he dead, I wonder?"
said Pinocchio, rubbing his hands together happily. Without a moment's hesitation, he started to step over him. But he had raised one leg when the serpent shot up like a spring and the marionette fell, head over heels backwards. He fell so awkwardly that his head stuck in the mud, and there he stood with his legs straight up in the air. At the sight of the marionette kicking and squirming like a young whirlwind, the serpent laughed so heartily and so long that at last he burst an artery and died on the spot. Pinocchio freed himself from this awkward position and once more began to run in order to reach the fairy's house before dark. As he went, the pangs of hunger grew so strong. Unable to withstand them, he jumped into the field and picked a few grapes that tempted him. Woe to him! No sooner had he reached the grapevine than crack went his legs. The poor marionette was caught in a trap set by a farmer for some weasels which came every night to steal his chickens. Chapter 21. Pinocchio was caught by a farmer who uses him as a watchdog for his chicken coop. Pinocchio, as you may very well imagine, began to scream and weep and beg. But all was of no use, for no houses were to be seen and not a soul passed by on the road. Night came on. A little because of the sharp pain in his legs, a little because of the fright of finding himself alone in the darkness of the field, the marionette was about to faint. When he saw a tiny glowworm flickering by, he called to her and said, "Dear little glowworm, will you set me free?" "Poor little fellow," replied the glowworm, stopping to look at him with pity. "How came you to be caught in this trap?"
"I stepped into this lonely field to take a few grapes and—"
"Are the grapes yours?"
"No."
"Who has taught you to take things that do not belong to you?"
"I was hungry."
"Hunger, my boy, is no reason for taking something that belongs to another."
It's true,
cried Pinocchio in tears.
I won't do it again.
Just then, the conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. It was the owner of the field, who was coming on tiptoes to see it. By a glance, he had caught the weasels which had been eating his chickens. Great was his surprise on holding up his lantern. He saw that, instead of a weasel, he had caught a boy. "Ah, you little thief," said the farmer in an angry voice. "So you are the one who steals my chickens."
Not I, no, no,
cried Pinocchio, sobbing bitterly.
I came here only to take a few grapes.
He who steals my grapes may very easily steal chickens also. Take my word for it. I'll give you a lesson that you'll remember for a long while. He opened the trap, grabbed the marionette by the collar, and carried him to the house as if he were a puppy. When he reached the yard, in the front of the house, he flung him to the ground, put a foot in his neck, and said to him roughly, "It is late now, and it's time for bed. Tomorrow we'll settle matters. In the meantime, since my watchdog died today, you will take his place and guard my henhouse." No sooner had than done, he slipped a dog collar around Pinocchio's neck and tightened it as if it would not come off. A long iron chain was tied to the collar, and the other end of the chain was nailed to the wall. If tonight it should happen to rain," said the farmer, "you can sleep in that little doghouse nearby, where you will find plenty of straw for a soft bed. It has been Melampo's bed for 3 years, and it will be good enough for you. And if by any chance any thieves should come, be sure to bark." After this last warning, the farmer went into the house and closed the door and barred it. Poor Pinocchio huddled close to the doghouse, more dead than alive from cold, hunger, and fright. Now and again he pulled and tugged at the collar, which nearly choked him, and cried out in a weak voice,
I deserve it. Yes, I deserve it. I have been nothing but a truant and a vagabond. I have never obeyed anyone, and I have always done as I pleased. If I only, like so many others, had studied and worked and stayed with my poor old father, I should not find myself here now, in this field and in this darkness, taking the place of a farmer's watchdog. Oh, if I could start all over again! But what is done can't be undone, and I must be patient.
After this little sermon to himself, which came from the very depths of his heart, Pinocchio went into the doghouse and fell asleep. Chapter 22. Pinocchio discovers the thieves, and as a reward for faithfulness, he regains his liberties. Even though the boy was very happy, he very seldom loses sleep over his worries. The marionette, being no exception to this rule, slept on peacefully for a few hours till very along towards midnight, when he was awakened by a strange whisperings and stealthy sounds coming from the yard. He stuck his nose out of the doghouse and saw 4 slender, hairy animals. They were weasels, small animals, very fond of both eggs and chickens. One of them left her company and, going to the door of the doghouse, said in a sweet voice, "Good evening, Melampo."
My name is not Melampo,
answered Pinocchio. "Who are you then?"
I am Pinocchio.
"What are you doing here?"
I'm the watchdog.
"But where is Melampo? Where is the old dog that used to live in this house?"
He died this morning.
"Died? Poor beast, he was so good. Still, Judging by your face, I think you, too, are a good-natured dog.
I beg your pardon, I am not a dog.
What are you, then?
I am a marionette.
Are you taking the place of the watchdog?
I'm so sorry to say that I am. I am being punished.
Well, I shall make the same terms with you that we made with dead Melempo. I am sure you will be glad to hear them.
What are the terms?
This is our plan. We'll come once in a while, as in the past, to pay visit to this hen house, and we'll take away 8 chickens. Of these, 7 are for us, and 1 for you, provided, of course, that you make believe you are sleeping and will not bark for the farmer.
Did Melempo really do that?
Asked Pinocchio. Indeed he did, and because of that we were best of friends. Sleep away peacefully, and remember that before we go you shall leave you a nice fat chicken all ready for your breakfast in the morning. Is that understood?
Even too well,
answered Pinocchio, and shaking his head in a threatening manner, he seemed to say,
We'll talk this over in a few minutes, my friends.
As soon as the 4 weasels had talked things over, they went straight to the chicken coop, which stood close to the doghouse. Digging busily with teeth and claws, they opened the little door and slipped in. But they were no sooner than they heard the door close with a sharp bang. The one who had done the trick was Pinocchio, who, not satisfied with that, dragged a heavy stone in front of it. That done, he started to bark, and he barked as if he were a real watchdog.
Bow, wow, wow, bow, wow.
The farmer heard the large barks and jumped out of bed. Taking his gun, he leapt to the window and shouted, What's the matter?
The thieves are here,
answered Pinocchio. Where are they?
In the chicken coop.
I'll come down in a second. And in fact, he was down in the yard in a twinkling and running toward the chicken coop. He opened the door, pulled out the weasels one by one, and after trying them in a bag, said to them in a happy voice, You are in my hands at last. I could punish you now, but I'll wait. In the morning you may come with me to the inn, and you'll make a fine dinner for some hungry mortal. It is really too great an honor for you, one you do not deserve. But, as you see, I am a very kind and generous man, and I'm going to do this for you. Then he went up to Pinocchio and began to pet and caress him. How did you ever find them out so quickly? And to think that Melempo, my faithful Melempo, never saw them in all these years! The marionette could have told then and there all he knew about the shameful contract between the dog and the weasels, but thinking of the dead dog, he said to himself,
Melempo is dead. What is the use of accusing him? The dead are gone and cannot defend themselves. The best thing to do is leave them in peace.
Were you awake or asleep when they came? Continued the farmer.
I was asleep,
answered Pinocchio.
But they awakened me with their whisperings. One of them even came to the door of the doghouse and said to me, If you promise not to bark, we'll make you a present of one of those chickens for your breakfast. Did you hear that? They had the audacity to make such a proposition as that to me. For you must know that, though I am a very wicked marionette full of faults, still I never have been nor shall be bribed.
Fine boy, cried the farmer, slapping him on the shoulder in a friendly way. You ought to be proud of yourself. And to show you what I think of you, you are free from this instant. And he slipped the dog collar from his neck. And that concludes chapter 22.